The summer of 1945 brought an end to the most devastating conflict humanity had ever witnessed. But for a group of Japanese women held in a makeshift detention facility on the outskirts of Manila, the war's conclusion marked not an ending, but the beginning of something they could never have imagined. 23-year-old Akiko Tanaka pressed her face against the wire fence, her fingers gripping the metal links until her knuckles turned white. The compound stretched before her, a collection of hastily constructed barracks surrounded by guard towers and searchlights. Everything she had been told about American soldiers, everything she had learned during years of wartime propaganda, was about to be tested in the most unexpected way. "They'll torture us," whispered Fumiko Sato, a nurse who had been captured alongside Akiko when their field hospital fell to advancing American forces. "My brother told me stories before he left for the front. The Americans are savages." Akiko didn't respond. She couldn't, because what she was witnessing through that fence contradicted everything she thought she knew. 3 American soldiers were approaching the women's section of the camp. They weren't marching with weapons drawn. They weren't shouting orders or threats. Instead, they carried wooden crates, supplies from what Akiko could see. And one of them was actually smiling. Not a cruel smile, not a predatory grin, but something that looked almost friendly. The lead soldier was tall, with sandy brown hair and a face that wouldn't have looked out of place in one of the Hollywood films that had been banned in Japan years ago. His uniform was clean, pressed, and he moved with an easy confidence that seemed entirely at odds with the role of a prison guard. "Good morning, ladies," he said in heavily accented but understandable Japanese. "My name is Sergeant James Mitchell. We've brought some additional supplies. Toiletries, clothing, and medical items. We'll be distributing them shortly." The women stared in stunned silence. Several took involuntary steps backward. Yuki Nakamura, a schoolteacher from Osaka, who had been working as a translator for the Imperial Army, grabbed Akiko's arm so tightly it hurt. "It's a trick," Yuki hissed. "They're trying to make us lower our guard before." But Sergeant Mitchell was already directing his men to set down the crates. Another soldier, this one shorter, with dark hair and kind eyes, began opening the boxes to show their contents. Soap, toothbrushes, clean towels, sanitary supplies, things the women hadn't seen in months. "We understand this is a difficult situation for everyone," Mitchell continued, his Japanese improving as he spoke, as if he was remembering lessons from long ago. "But I want you to know that you will be treated in accordance with the Geneva Convention. You will not be harmed. You will receive adequate food, medical care, and shelter. If you have any concerns or needs, please bring them to myself or Lieutenant Anderson." He gestured to a third soldier, a young man who couldn't have been more than 22 or 23, with red hair and freckles that made him look even younger. Lieutenant Anderson gave a small, respectful nod. Akiko felt something shift inside her chest, a crack in the armor of certainty she had built around herself. This wasn't what she had expected. This wasn't what she had been prepared for. "Why?" The word escaped her lips before she could stop it. "Why are you being kind to us?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Several of the other women gasped at her boldness, speaking directly to an American soldier, questioning him. It felt dangerous, reckless. But Akiko couldn't take the words back now. Sergeant Mitchell turned to look at her directly. His eyes were blue, startlingly blue, and when they met hers, she saw something she hadn't expected to find there. Compassion. "Because you're human beings," he said simply, "and because the war is over." Those 5 words, "because the war is over," seemed to echo through the compound. For many of the women, it was the first time they had heard it stated so plainly, so finely. The war was over. Japan had surrendered. Everything they had known, everything they had believed in, had crumbled to dust. Over the following days, Akiko watched the American soldiers with growing confusion and curiosity. They weren't the monsters from the propaganda posters. They didn't leer at the women or make crude gestures. They didn't withhold food as punishment or use violence to maintain order. Instead, they brought 3 meals a day, not luxurious but adequate and sometimes surprisingly good. They arranged for a doctor to visit the compound twice a week to treat injuries and illnesses. They even set up a small recreation area where the women could sit in the shade and talk among themselves. "I don't understand it," Fumiko admitted one evening as she and Akiko sat together on the steps of their barracks. "Everything we were told, it was all lies?" Akiko didn't have an answer. She was grappling with the same question, the same cognitive dissonance that was tearing apart everything she thought she understood about the world. But it was Sergeant Mitchell who truly baffled her. He made a point of checking on the women's section every day, always polite, always respectful. He learned their names, all 47 of them, and remembered details about their lives. He asked Yuki about her teaching career. He inquired about Fumiko's nursing training. He even brought Akiko a book when he learned she enjoyed reading. "It's in English," he said apologetically, handing her a worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. "But I thought you might enjoy the challenge. Your English seems quite good." Akiko took the book with trembling hands. "Thank you," she managed to say. "But why would you do this for me?" Mitchell's expression grew thoughtful. "My sister is about your age," he said quietly. "She's back home in California, probably worrying herself sick about whether I'm alive or dead. When I look at you and the other women here, I think about her. I think about how I'd want someone to treat her if our positions were reversed." That night, Akiko lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling and trying to reconcile 2 incompatible truths. The Americans were supposed to be the enemy. They were supposed to be cruel, barbaric, inhuman. But Sergeant Mitchell had compared her to his sister. He had given her a book. He had treated her like a person. The whispers started soon after, quiet conversations between the women when they thought no one was listening. "Did you see how Lieutenant Anderson helped Mrs. Yamamoto with her injured leg? Sergeant Mitchell brought extra blankets because he noticed some of us were cold at night. They're not what we expected. They're almost kind. They look like movie stars." That last comment came from Keiko Hayashi, a young woman barely 20 years old who had worked in a munitions factory before being evacuated to the Philippines. She said it with a mixture of wonder and guilt, as if admitting that their captors were handsome was somehow a betrayal. But Akiko understood what she meant. There was something about the American soldiers, the way they carried themselves, the confidence in their movements, the easy smiles, that seemed to belong to a different world. A world of Hollywood films and jazz music and freedom that Japan had spent years trying to suppress and deny. As the days turned into weeks, Akiko found herself watching Sergeant Mitchell more closely. She noticed the way he always made sure the women received their full rations before the men ate. She saw how he intervened when one of the other soldiers made an inappropriate comment, his voice firm but not cruel. She observed the careful distance he maintained, close enough to be helpful, far enough to be respectful. And slowly, terrifyingly, she began to realize something that would have been unthinkable just months before. She was starting to trust him. The realization hit her one afternoon when Mitchell was helping to repair a leak in the women's barracks roof. He was up on a ladder, working alongside another soldier, and he was laughing at something Lieutenant Anderson had said. The sound of his laughter, genuine, warm, unguarded, made something twist in Akiko's chest. This was the enemy. This was the man whose country had dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, killing hundreds of thousands of her countrymen. This was the soldier who represented everything she had been taught to hate and fear. But when he climbed down from that ladder and smiled at her, really smiled, with his eyes crinkling at the corners, She couldn't find any hatred in her heart. Only confusion. Only questions. And only the terrifying possibility that everything she had believed about the world might have been wrong. "Are you all right, Miss Tanaka?" Mitchell asked, noticing her staring. Akiko blinked, realizing she had been standing frozen in place. "Yes," she said quickly. "I'm fine. Thank you for fixing the roof." "Of course," he replied. "Can't have you ladies getting rained on. Though I have to admit, my carpentry skills are pretty rusty. Let's hope it holds." He was making a joke. A self-deprecating joke. As if they were normal people having a normal conversation, rather than captor and captive in the aftermath of a brutal war. As Mitchell walked away, Akiko felt Fumiko appear at her elbow. "You're staring at him," Fumiko said quietly. "I'm not." "You are, and you're not the only one." Fumiko's voice dropped to barely a whisper. "We all are. Because none of us can believe this is real. None of us can believe they're treating us like this." Akiko turned to look at her friend. "What does it mean, Fumiko? What does any of this mean?" Fumiko shook her head slowly. "I don't know. But I think maybe we were lied to about more than just the war." That night, as Akiko opened the book Sergeant Mitchell had given her and began to read by the light of a small lamp, she realized that her world had already changed in ways she couldn't fully comprehend. The war might be over, but her personal battle, the battle to understand who she was in this new reality, was only just beginning. And at the center of that battle, whether she wanted to admit it or not, was a blue-eyed American sergeant who treated enemy prisoners like human beings and smiled like a movie star. 3 weeks into captivity, and the impossible had become routine. Akiko found herself looking forward to morning roll call, not because she enjoyed being counted like livestock, but because Sergeant Mitchell always had something encouraging to say. A comment about the weather. A joke about the terrible coffee. A genuine inquiry about how everyone had slept. Small things that shouldn't have mattered, but somehow did. "You're smiling more," Yuki observed one morning as they lined up for breakfast. "I've noticed it over the past few days." Akiko's hand flew to her mouth, as if she could hide the evidence. "I'm not. You are. We all are." Yuki glanced around at the other women, and Akiko realized she was right. The atmosphere in the compound had shifted. The women no longer moved with the hunched, defeated posture of prisoners expecting abuse. They walked with their heads up. They talked and occasionally laughed. They had begun to live again, rather than merely survive. "It's dangerous," Akiko whispered, "getting comfortable here, trusting them." "Is it?" Yuki's eyes were thoughtful behind her wire-rimmed glasses. "Or is it more dangerous to keep hating people who have shown us nothing but kindness?" The question haunted Akiko throughout the day. It haunted her even more that evening when Sergeant Mitchell approached her in the recreation area, where she sat reading the book he had given her. "How are you finding it?" he asked, gesturing to the novel. "Mockingbird, I mean." Akiko looked up, startled. She had been so absorbed in the story that she hadn't heard him approach. "It's complicated," she said carefully. "The themes of justice and prejudice, they're making me think about things differently." Mitchell's eyebrows rose slightly. "That's Harper Lee for you. She has a way of holding up a mirror to society." He paused, then added, "May I sit?" Akiko's heart began to race. Having a brief conversation while standing was one thing. Sitting together, talking at length. That felt like crossing a line she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. But she nodded. Mitchell sat down on the bench beside her, maintaining a respectful distance. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then he said, "I've been meaning to ask you something, Miss Tanaka. Before the war, what did you do? What was your life like?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her about her life before, about the person she had been when the world still made sense. I was a student, she said slowly, at Tokyo Women's University. I was studying literature and languages. I wanted to be a translator, maybe a teacher. She looked down at her hands. That feels like a lifetime ago now. It doesn't have to be, Mitchell said quietly. The war is over. You'll go home eventually. You can still become those things. Akiko let out a bitter laugh. Home? Tokyo is in ruins. My family's house was destroyed in the firebombing. My father died in the war. My mother and younger brother. I don't even know if they're alive. What home is there to go back to? The words came out harsher than she intended, and she immediately regretted them, but Mitchell didn't flinch. He didn't offer empty platitudes or try to minimize her pain. I'm sorry, he said simply. I'm sorry for what you've lost. I'm sorry for all of it. Akiko turned to look at him, really look at him. Why are you apologizing? You didn't start the war. No, Mitchell agreed. But my country helped end it in a way that killed hundreds of thousands of civilians. I can be glad the war is over and still be sorry for the cost. He met her eyes. Those two things can exist at the same time. Something in Akiko's chest cracked open. She had spent weeks trying to hold on to her anger, her resentment, her sense of righteous victimhood. But Mitchell's quiet acknowledgement of her pain, without defensiveness, without justification, made it impossible to maintain that wall. I don't understand you, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't understand any of you. We were enemies. We killed your soldiers. Your country killed our civilians. How can you sit here and talk to me like we're just two people having a conversation? Mitchell was quiet for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that suggested he had thought about this question many times before. Because we are just two people having a conversation, he said. The war made us enemies, but it doesn't have to make us inhuman to each other. I've seen what happens when we forget that, when we start seeing the other side as monsters instead of people. It makes us into monsters, too. He looked out across the compound, his expression distant. I've done things in this war that I'm not proud of. I've killed men who probably had families waiting for them, who probably didn't want to be soldiers any more than I did. I can't change that, but I can choose how I act now. I can choose to see you as a person, not as an enemy. Akiko felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes. She blinked them back furiously. We were told you were barbarians, that you would torture us, violate us, kill us without mercy. Everything we were told was a lie. And what were you told about your own military? Mitchell asked gently. About how they treated prisoners, about what they did in China, in the Philippines, in every place they conquered. Akiko's breath caught. She had heard whispers, rumors of atrocities committed by Japanese forces, but she had dismissed them as enemy propaganda, as lies meant to demoralize the population. I don't know what to believe anymore, she admitted. Everything I thought I knew about the world has been turned upside down. Mitchell nodded slowly. That's the hardest part of war ending. You have to rebuild not just cities and countries, but your entire understanding of reality. He turned to look at her again. But maybe that's not entirely a bad thing. Maybe some of what we believed needed to be torn down. Over the following days, Akiko found herself seeking out conversations with Mitchell. It started innocently enough. Discussions about books, about language, about the differences between American and Japanese culture. But gradually, the conversations deepened. Mitchell told her about growing up in California, about his family's small farm, about his dreams of becoming a teacher after the war. Akiko shared memories of Tokyo before the war, of cherry blossom festivals and summer fireworks, of a world that seemed impossibly distant now. The other women noticed, of course. Fumiko teased her gently about it. Keiko looked at her with something like envy. Even Yuki, usually so pragmatic, seemed concerned. "Be careful, Akiko," she warned one evening. "I know he seems kind, but he's still our captor. Don't forget that." But it was becoming harder and harder to remember, especially when Mitchell did things like arrange for the women to receive letters from home, the first contact many of them had had with their families in months, or when he organized a small celebration for Fumiko's birthday, complete with a cake that one of the camp cooks had somehow managed to bake. "Why do you do these things?" Akiko asked him one afternoon. They were sitting in the shade of a large tree at the edge of the compound, ostensibly so Mitchell could help her with her English pronunciation. "The letters, the birthday celebration. None of that is required by the Geneva Convention." Mitchell smiled. "No, it's not. But just because something isn't required doesn't mean it isn't right." He paused, then added, "Besides, I like seeing you smile. All of you. You've been through hell. You deserve moments of happiness." Akiko's heart did something complicated in her chest. "You're a strange man, Sergeant Mitchell." "James," he said. "When we're alone like this, you can call me James." "James," Akiko repeated, testing the name on her tongue. It felt foreign and intimate all at once. "I'm Akiko, not Miss Tanaka. Just Akiko." "Akiko," James said, and the way he pronounced her name, carefully, respectfully, with genuine warmth, made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt in years. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. Then James said, "Can I ask you something personal?" Akiko tensed slightly but nodded. "Do you hate us? Americans, I mean, for what happened to your country, to your family? Would you hate me if I weren't being kind to you?" It was a fair question, and it deserved an honest answer. Akiko thought carefully before responding. "I wanted to hate you," she said finally. "When I first arrived here, I wanted to hate all of you. It would have been easier that way, to have a clear enemy, a clear target for all my anger and grief." She looked at him. "But you made it impossible. You and Lieutenant Anderson and the others. You treated us like human beings when you had every reason not to. How can I hate someone who shows me kindness when I expected cruelty?" "That doesn't answer the question," James said gently. "Can you forgive us? Can you forgive me as a representative of the country that destroyed yours?" Akiko felt tears welling up again, and this time she didn't try to stop them. "I don't know," she whispered. "I don't know if I can forgive. But I think maybe I can stop hating. Maybe that's a start." James reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and placed his hand over hers where it rested on the bench between them. The touch was gentle, respectful, and it sent electricity racing up Akiko's arm. "That's more than a start," he said quietly. "That's everything." They sat like that for several minutes, hands touching, neither speaking. Around them, the compound continued its evening routine, soldiers changing shifts, women returning to their barracks, the sounds of dinner being prepared. But in that moment, under that tree, Akiko felt like they existed in a bubble outside of time and war and history. When James finally stood to leave, he looked down at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Thank you, Akiko," he said, "for giving me a chance, for seeing me as more than just a uniform." "Thank you for the same," she replied. As she watched him walk away, Akiko realized with a mixture of terror and wonder that something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't just starting to trust James Mitchell. She was starting to care about him, and in the ruins of a world torn apart by war, that felt like both the most dangerous and the most hopeful thing imaginable. That night, as Akiko lay in her bunk, she could hear the other women whispering in the darkness. "Did you see them today, sitting together under the tree?" They looked like something out of a movie. It's not right. He's the enemy. Is he, though? Is he really? Akiko closed her eyes and tried to quiet her racing heart. She didn't have answers to those whispered questions. She didn't know what was right or wrong anymore. All she knew was that tomorrow, she would see James again. And despite everything, despite the war, despite the loss, despite the impossibility of it all, she was looking forward to it. The announcement came on a humid morning in late September, delivered by Lieutenant Anderson with an apologetic expression that immediately set Akiko's nerves on edge. "Ladies, I need your attention, please." Anderson's Japanese was improving, though not as fluent as James's. "We've received orders from command. You'll be repatriated to Japan within the next 2 weeks. Ships are being arranged to transport you home." Home. The word should have filled Akiko with joy, with relief, with hope. Instead, it landed in her stomach like a stone. Around her, the other women reacted with a mixture of emotions. Some cried with happiness. Others looked terrified at the prospect of returning to a devastated homeland. Fumiko grabbed Akiko's hand and squeezed it tightly. "We're going home," Fumiko whispered. "We're actually going home." But Akiko couldn't speak. Her eyes were scanning the compound, searching for the one person whose reaction mattered most to her. She found him standing near the administrative building, his face carefully neutral, but his hands clenched into fists at his sides. James had heard the news too. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations and emotions. The women were given forms to fill out, asked about their destinations, their families, their plans. Akiko went through the motions mechanically, her mind elsewhere. It wasn't until evening, when she found herself once again under their tree, that James appeared. He sat down beside her without a word, and for several long minutes, they simply existed in silence. 2 weeks, James finally said. His voice was rough, strained. 2 weeks, Akiko echoed. "I should be happy for you. You're going home. You're getting your life back." "Should be," Akiko repeated. "But you're not." James turned to look at her, and the raw emotion in his eyes took her breath away. "No," he admitted. "I'm not, and I know that's selfish. I know I have no right to feel this way. You're a prisoner, I'm your captor, and this was always going to be temporary, but it doesn't feel temporary anymore." Akiko finished for him. "It feels like something real. Something that matters." "Yes," the word came out as barely more than a breath. "Akiko, I need to tell you something. I need to say it before you leave, even though I have no right to say it, even though it's completely inappropriate given our circumstances." Akiko's heart was hammering so hard she was certain he could hear it. "What is it?" James took a deep breath. "I've fallen in love with you." The world seemed to stop spinning. Akiko stared at him, unable to process what she had just heard. "Love." He had said love. "I know it's impossible," James continued, the words tumbling out now as if he couldn't stop them. "I know we're from different worlds, different countries, that just spent years trying to destroy each other. I know that you're going home and I'll probably never see you again. But I needed you to know. I needed you to know that these past weeks with you have been the most meaningful of my life. That you've changed how I see the world, how I see myself. That you..." Akiko kissed him. She didn't plan it, didn't think about it. She simply leaned forward and pressed her lips to his, cutting off his words with an action that said everything she couldn't articulate. For a heartbeat, James froze in shock. Then his arms came around her, pulling her closer, and he was kissing her back with a desperate intensity that matched her own. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Akiko found tears streaming down her face. "I love you too," she whispered. "I've been trying not to. I've been telling myself it's wrong, that it's a betrayal of everything I should believe in. But I can't help it. I love you, James Mitchell." James cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs gently wiping away her tears. What are we going to do? I don't know. Akiko's voice broke. I don't know if there's anything we can do. They held each other as the sun set, both knowing that they were standing at an impossible crossroads. The war had brought them together, but peace was tearing them apart. Over the next week, they stole every moment they could together. James taught Akiko more English phrases. Akiko taught James to write simple kanji characters. They talked about everything and nothing, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears about the future. "Come with me," James said one night, the words desperate and hopeful. "Come to America. I know it sounds crazy, but we could make it work. You could finish your education, become that translator you wanted to be. We could—" "James," Akiko placed her fingers over his lips. "I can't. My mother, my brother. If they're alive, they need me. Japan needs everyone who survived to help rebuild. I can't abandon my country, my people, not now." "Then I'll come to Japan," James said immediately. "After I'm discharged, I'll find a way to get there. I'll find you." Akiko wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe that love could overcome the enormous obstacles standing between them, the distance, the cultural differences, the lingering wounds of war. But she was also a realist. "The occupation forces will be in Japan for years," she said quietly. "But you won't be stationed there. The military won't send you to a place where you have personal connections, and even if you could come, how would we live? A Japanese woman and an American man together. We would be outcasts in both our societies." "I don't care," James said fiercely. "I don't care what anyone thinks. I love you, Akiko. That's all that matters." "But it's not all that matters," Akiko said, her heart breaking with every word. "We don't live in a vacuum. We live in a world that's been torn apart by hatred and violence. A world that's not ready for what we are." "Then we'll make it ready," James insisted. "We'll be part of building something new, something better." Akiko wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe him. The night before the women were scheduled to leave, James found Akiko packing her few belongings. He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. "Don't open it until you're on the ship," he said. "Promise me." Akiko promised, tucking the package carefully into her bag. "I also have something for you," she said, pulling out a small piece of paper. On it, she had written her mother's address in Tokyo, or at least, where the address had been before the firebombing. "I don't know if the house is still standing. I don't know if anyone is there. But if you ever come to Japan, if you ever try to find me, start here." James took the paper like it was made of gold, folding it carefully and placing it in his breast pocket, right over his heart. "I will find you," he said. "I don't know how long it will take, but I will find you. I promise." They spent their last night together, sitting under their tree, holding hands and watching the stars. They didn't talk much. There was nothing left to say that hadn't already been said. When dawn broke, the women assembled for the final time. A convoy of trucks waited to take them to the port where the repatriation ships were docked. James stood at attention with the other soldiers, his face professionally blank. But when Akiko walked past him, their eyes met, and she saw everything he couldn't say reflected there. "I love you. I'll miss you. I'll find you. Don't forget me." Akiko climbed into the truck, her heart shattering with every step that took her further from him. As the convoy pulled away, she turned to look back one last time. James was still standing there, watching her leave. Even from a distance, she could see the tears on his face. Fumiko put an arm around Akiko's shoulders. "You love him," she said softly. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Akiko whispered. "I love him. Will you see him again?" Akiko looked down at the package in her lap, then out at the road ahead that would take her back to a Japan she no longer recognized. "I don't know," she said honestly. but I have to believe that if we survived a war, we can survive this too. I have to believe that love is stronger than the things that try to tear us apart. On the ship, as the Philippines disappeared behind them and Japan appeared on the horizon, Akiko finally opened James's package. Inside was the copy of To Kill a Mockingbird he had given her, and tucked between its pages was a letter. My dearest Akiko, by the time you read this, you'll be on your way home. I hope you find your family safe. I hope you find a Japan that's ready to rebuild and become something new and beautiful. I meant what I said. I will find you. It might take months or years, but I will come to Japan and I will find you. Until then, know that you've changed my life in ways I can't fully express. You've taught me that even in the darkest times, there's room for hope, for connection, for love. Wait for me. Yours always, James. Akiko pressed the letter to her chest and let herself cry. For everything she had lost, for everything she had found, and for the impossible hope that somehow, against all odds, their story wasn't over. It was only beginning.